The sky above the ridges had turned the color of dull steel, heavy and unbending, and I knew what was coming long before the first flakes touched the ground. Snow had been falling since morning, slow at first, then harder, until the world outside my cabin blurred into one long curtain of white. It wasn't the kind of storm that passes quick. No, this was the kind that settles in, digs deep, and dares a man to outlast it. I'd been splitting logs since noon, my gloves stiff, shoulders burning with the kind of ache that creeps into the bone no matter how you shift your weight. The cold doesn't scream up here. It doesn't howl like it does on the open plains. It does worse. It threads itself quiet through the cracks of the pine woods, slides under your coat, and reminds you that no matter how strong you think you are, the mountain will always decide if you belong. My cabin sat in a basin where the land flattened just enough to build, tucked in by ridges on three sides and forest on the fourth. The walls leaned with the years, shutters warped from storms I'd patched but never fully beat. A man could survive here if he didn't mind the quiet, and quiet was the only thing I'd asked for. I'd lived here since my wife passed, nearly 8 winters back now. She caught fever down in Holbrook. Our boy didn't make it to his second winter. After I put them both in the ground, I stopped counting days by anything other than chores. I came up here because the world below carried too many voices, too many eyes, and I didn't have the will to answer any of them. Up here, no one asked questions. No one expected a man to be more than his own work. You learn to build a rhythm when you're alone. Chop wood, haul water, patch roofs, feed stock. If you do it steady, winter won't kill you. But if you falter, even once, the land won't forgive you. I kept to those rhythms day in and day out, because it was all that made sense after loss stripped everything else away. I boarded over the second window after a storm cracked it clean through. I buried my last dog by the sycamore near the barn. Those are the kind of markers a man lays down when the years stretch out quiet. They aren't memories you keep alive by choice. They just stay, heavy as the snow piling up outside. I'd long since stopped expecting company. Neighbors? None close enough to matter. Visitors? Not unless they were lost, desperate, or planning something mean. I didn't ride into town more than once a season. People in Holbrook had long ago stopped asking after me. And truth be told, I liked it better that way. It's hard to explain, but grief makes you both heavy and hollow at once. Heavy because it presses on your chest until breathing feels like work, and hollow because it strips your days of sound. The silence in this cabin wasn't kind, but it was honest. I could live with that. But if I tell this story right, you'll understand something I didn't. That winter, the world has a way of sending someone to your door when you've convinced yourself you don't need anyone. Sometimes it's a punishment. Sometimes it's mercy. And sometimes it's both. That storm was only the beginning. I thought I knew what winter looked like. I thought I knew what it meant to be alone. But the night I heard footsteps in the snow, soft, irregular, faint against the weight of the storm, my life shifted. I didn't know it then, but nothing about the quiet I'd built for myself was going to stay the same. See, solitude can keep a man alive, but it can't keep him human. I didn't realize how much I'd been turning into stone until I saw her, small, barefoot, staggering through snow deep enough to take a man down in minutes. Her hair black, braided long down her back. Her arms clutched tight to her chest like she could hold herself together by will alone. She didn't belong there, not in the middle of that storm, not in white man's country, not barefoot with no food or weapon. She belonged to death. That's what I thought at first. That winter wanted to claim her, and it nearly did. But the moment she dropped to her knees in the snow not 10 yards from my steps, when her lips cracked open and I heard her voice rasp out, "Please, let me in," something inside me shifted. I can't tell you what made me move toward her instead of bolting my door. I told myself for years that I was done carrying anyone else's survival. But maybe a man doesn't get to choose the moments that pull him back into the living. Maybe mercy chooses him, whether he's ready or not. That night, I carried her across my threshold. I didn't know her name then, didn't know her story. All I knew was she was a body half broken, fighting to breathe, and I couldn't let the snow bury her the way it had buried too much already. And that's where our story begins, with a storm, a silence, and a woman who should have died, but didn't. Before we go any further, if you're here listening, do me a favor. Like this video if the story holds you. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you want to hear how this winter changed everything I thought I knew about loss, love, and what it means to build a home, follow this channel. There's more to come. The sound reached me first. And in a storm like that, any sound that isn't wind or timber breaking sets a man on edge. It was faint, uneven. The soft crunch of snow pressed under something too light to be an elk and too ragged to be a rider with sense. I set my axe down and straightened, boots buried to the ankle in drift, my breath clouding heavy in the still air. The ridges had gone gray under the storm, and all I saw at first was the blur of trees. Every instinct in me stiffened. Years alone teach a man to trust his gut, and mine told me danger came quiet, not loud. I thought maybe it was a thief, or worse, a prospector with hungry eyes and a gun half cocked. Out here, men didn't knock on your door to ask for bread. They came because they wanted something that wasn't theirs. But then I saw her. A figure broke loose from the white, stumbling through the fence line like she'd been walking for hours without knowing where her feet landed. Thin, bare legs cut through the snow until she dropped almost to her knees, then dragged herself up again. She was barefoot. My mind could hardly take that in at first. Barefoot in the snow deep enough to numb a man's bones inside an hour. She wore a buckskin dress torn at the hem, her arms locked around her chest as though holding herself together. Her hair was black, braided in one thick cord down her back. But the braid was frayed, strands loose from the storm. Her face was dark, hollowed and tight with the kind of exhaustion I'd only ever seen in men at war when they were about to lay down and never rise again. Apache. The thought hit me sharp, and my gut tensed. Not because I hated her people, I wasn't that kind of man, but I'd seen enough to know Apache women didn't wander alone through white man's country, not in the dead of winter, not without boots, not without someone else close by. My first thought was trap, bait for a rifle shot, someone waiting in the trees. I scanned the ridge hard, my back rigid, every nerve braced. But no shadow followed, no rider came behind her. The closer she came, the more I knew this wasn't a trick. Her steps weren't steady. Her body wasn't playing a part. She was breaking down with every yard. When she reached the edge of the yard, her knees buckled and she dropped into the snow, hands sinking, arms swaying like she'd collapse right there for good. I could hear the ragged sound of her breathing, sharp and shallow, even over the storm. I should have turned away. That's what every part of me screamed. Bolt the door. Let the snow take her. Wake up tomorrow to nothing but quiet again. That's what I'd been living for. That's what had kept me alive when grief tried to drag me under. Keep everyone out. Let the silence do its work. But then she lifted her head. Her lips cracked when she spoke, voice so raw it was hardly more than a whisper. Please, she said. Her eyes found mine across the white. Let me in. My jaw tightened, hands still frozen at my sides. Every part of me said, don't. Don't invite it. Don't invite her. But she didn't stop. Her voice dropped lower, teeth chattering so hard I could see it in the tremble of her face. I can reward you, please. There was no reward in her, nothing but a body on the edge of death. She had no pack, no weapon, no food. Her fingers were stiff and red, her toes buried in drifts that must have been burning like fire. And still I stood there torn in two. One half of me was the man who'd buried his wife and boy and locked the world outside after. The other half was the soldier who had seen too many men die in mud and frost and swore he'd never again stand by and watch when he could have done something. I don't know which part won, but I stepped forward. My boots crunched through the drift, slow, steady, until I crouched beside her. She didn't flinch. Fear was long gone from her eyes. What I saw there wasn't panic. It was shame. The look of someone who expected to be turned away. Can you walk? I asked, voice low. Her eyes fluttered closed, head shaking faintly. I glanced once at the trees, at the nothingness of that cold wilderness pressing in, then slid my arm beneath her knees and another behind her back. She was lighter than I expected, too light. Her body tensed against me, but she didn't fight. She didn't speak again either. I carried her across the yard, my boots breaking the drift, and when I kicked the cabin door open with my heel, the warmth hit us both at once. Firelight, the smell of beans simmering on the stove, smoke and pine caught in the rafters. My home wasn't much, but it was life. I set her down on the rug by the hearth, her head tipped back against the stone, her chest rising shallow, her eyes trying to take in the rifle on the wall, the shelves, the table. Suspicion flickered, but it was weak, dulled by exhaustion. I didn't ask her name. She didn't ask mine. There would be time for that if she lasted the night. All I knew in that moment was this: against every reason, against every promise I'd made to myself, I had let her in. And for the first time in 8 years, the silence of this cabin wasn't mine alone. The first thing I did was get her feet off the floor. Cold like that eats a man whole, and for someone barefoot, it works faster than fire. I pulled the thickest blanket from my cot and wrapped it tight around her legs. Her skin was stiff under my hands, red and raw, but not black yet, not dead. I'd seen frostbite before in the war, seen men lose toes and fingers in the mud because no one had sense enough to move them. I wasn't about to let that happen here, not in my cabin, not to her. Her head leaned against the hearth, eyes half-lidded, breathing shallow. She looked around once, slow, taking in the shelves, the rifle on the wall, the pot steaming on the stove. Suspicion flickered across her face, weak but present. I knew that look. You don't survive long out here if you don't keep one eye sharp. But the truth was, she didn't have strength enough left for fear. I poured hot water into a tin cup, added salt, and a touch of honey I'd saved since last spring. I knelt in front of her and held it out. Drink it slow, I said. If you throw it up, I'm not cleaning it. Her hands shook as she took it, both of them wrapped around the cup like it was the only heat left in the world. She lifted it, careful, sipped small. I watched her throat move with each swallow. She didn't look away from me. But she didn't speak either. That silence hung thick between us, but I didn't press. I've never been one for questions. Two, many men in this world think answers belong to them. I'd learned long ago that most folks will tell you what matters when they're ready, and not a moment sooner. When she set the cup down, I unwrapped her feet and rubbed warmth back into them with cloth and water. Her toes twitched under the touch, painful but alive. She didn't flinch, she didn't cry. She just sat with her eyes open, dull but watchful, like she was bracing herself for judgment. I thought about the choice I'd made bringing her inside. Thought about how easy it would have been to let the storm finish its work. But then I remembered too many nights in the war. Men I couldn't save lying in the mud, with snow seeping into their boots. I wasn't built to walk away from someone who couldn't stand. Not anymore. Hours passed like that. The fire steady, the snow pressing hard against the shutters, the wind testing the cabin walls. I kept feeding the flames, moving quiet, while she stayed curled near the hearth, wrapped in the blanket. At some point, her eyes closed and her breathing evened out. Sleep took her. I didn't move her, just set another quilt close in case she woke cold. When midnight came, she stirred. Her eyes opened slow, then drifted down to her feet. I'd wrapped them above a basin of warm water. She flexed her toes, lips parting, but no sound came. Her fingers gripped the blanket tighter. "You're lucky they're still pink," I told her, voice low, not unkind. Another hour and they'd have been gone. Her eyes shifted toward me. That was the first time I heard her speak. Her voice rasped, thin and dry. "I walked 2 days." I frowned. "No boots?" She shook her head. "Taken. When they cast me out." The words settled between us, heavy as stone. My stomach knotted. Cast out. I didn't know what she meant in full, but I understood enough. Someone had turned their back on her, left her for dead. I could have asked why, but the weight in her voice told me the answer wouldn't be simple. I only nodded. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. I ladled beans into a bowl, tore off bread, set it in front of her. Her hands shook again, but she ate steady, every motion careful, deliberate. Not the kind of eating born of politeness, but survival. She finished half before setting it aside and drawing the blanket tighter. I sat back, studying her. "What's your name?" She looked at me long enough I thought she wouldn't answer. Then finally she said, "Tala." I let it sit a moment before nodding. "I'm John." That was it. No more words passed between us for the rest of the night. But a name is a powerful thing, more than people realize. It meant she wasn't just a body I'd pulled out of the snow. She was Tala. And now that name lived inside this cabin too. Later, I set up a spare cot across from the stove. I laid a blanket on top, stood back, and gestured toward it. She moved slow, pain on her face, as she tested her weight. She didn't ask for help, didn't complain. She stood, limped, and lay down on her own. Before turning her face to the fire, she spoke again. "You're alone too." Her words hit me sharp. She wasn't asking. She already knew. I nodded. 8 years. She didn't ask what happened. I didn't tell her. Some losses don't need to be spoken to be understood. We said nothing more. The fire crackled, the wind moaned against the shutters, and I lay down on my own cot, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. It wasn't warm yet, not between us, not fully. But for the first time in a long time, the cabin wasn't only filled with my silence. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something I hadn't thought possible anymore. The days after she came into my cabin passed slow, each one marked by the crackle of fire and the groan of snow sliding off the roof. The storm outside showed no sign of easing, and maybe that was a mercy. Storms keep the world at bay. They hold you still, force you to sit with what's in front of you. And now what was in front of me was Tala. She spoke little, but the silence between us wasn't the same as before. It carried weight. She ate slow, steady, like every bite mattered. She sat close to the fire, her hands always wrapped around something warm, mug, bowl, blanket, like she needed proof the cold hadn't won. I found myself watching her more than I meant to. The way her shoulders stiffened when the wind howled, the way her eyes drifted to the window, not searching for anything, just remembering. I tried not to think about what her past held, tried to keep my questions locked. But one night, while the fire burned low and the cabin glowed with that dim orange light that makes shadows taller than men, I asked, "Why'd they cast you out?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't look at me, only at the fire. For a long moment, I thought she'd stay silent. Then she said, "Because I gave him no child." The words fell hard, sharper than any wind outside. I sat back, not sure what to say. "Who?" I asked, though I already guessed. "My husband, the chief." That explained the dress she'd come in, torn but once ceremonial, explained the necklace of bones she still wore, even cracked as it was. She hadn't been a common wife. She'd been chosen, displayed, carried like a mark of pride. And when no child came, pride turned to blame. "No children at all?" I asked, gentle. She turned then, eyes flashing quick, not with fear, but defense. "Not with him." I held her gaze a moment, then nodded. "Not your fault." She didn't answer, only pulled the blanket tighter and looked back at the fire, but something in her shoulders loosened, as though my words had taken a weight from her, even for a breath. I let the quiet stretch. My own memories rose whether I wanted them or not. The fever that had taken my wife, the way my boy had gone gray and cold before his second winter was half through. I'd buried them both in the ground near Hullbrook, stood over the earth until the wind cut through me. After that, I'd built walls around myself higher than any ridge out here. She didn't ask about them. But later that night, as I sat at the table with my back to the fire, she said it soft, almost to herself. "You've lost too." I looked over, surprised by the surety in her voice. "Yes," I said simply. She didn't press and I didn't explain. I didn't need to. There was something in her eyes that told me she knew loss better than most. It was strange, sitting across from someone who carried a grief as heavy as mine. For years, I'd believed no one could understand what I lived with. But here was this woman, cast out into the snow to die, her body still aching from the cold, and she bore herself with a strength that startled me. One morning, as the storm lightened and the cabin filled with the pale gray of dawn, I caught her watching me as I mended a strap. She didn't look away when our eyes met. Instead, she said, "You don't strike me like most white men." I set the strap down, not sure if I should take that as praise. "What do you mean? You didn't leave me in the snow?" I wanted to tell her I'd thought about it, wanted to confess how close I'd come to turning my back, but the truth was simpler. "Couldn't," I said. She nodded once as if that was answer enough. After that, the air in the cabin shifted, still quiet, but no longer hollow. She started to move about more, limping but steady, helped peel potatoes, straightened bedding, placed firewood closer to the hearth without me asking. She never acted like she belonged, but she never asked permission either. It was her way of living, careful but certain. I found myself talking more than I had in years. Small things about the cows, the ridge trails, the way the snow would settle into crust after a thaw. She listened, not like someone filling silence, but like each word was worth carrying. One night, as the fire dimmed and the world outside went still, she asked me where my wife had died. Down in Holbrook, I said quietly. Fever took her. Our boy, too. Her eyes met mine across the fire. You stayed here after. There wasn't anything left down there worth staying for. We let the silence take the rest, but it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like two people who understood that words couldn't change what had already been lost. That was the first time in years I felt my grief soften, not because it was gone, but because someone else had placed their grief beside it. Hers wasn't the same as mine, but it carried the same weight. And somehow, that made mine easier to hold. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if the storm would break or if she'd walk away when the trails cleared. But for the first time since I'd buried my family, I felt something I hadn't thought I'd feel again. I felt less alone. The storm finally eased, though the cold stayed sharp enough to crack boards and sting my lungs with every breath. By then, Tala had found her footing inside my walls, not just in body, but in the spirit too. She moved slower than most, still limping from frost's bite. But she never once asked for pity. She just kept doing what she could, as though proving to herself more than me that she belonged among the living. One morning I stepped out to split wood, and when I came back, I found her at the table with a knife in her hand. For a second, my gut tensed, until I saw what she was cutting. Her braid lay across the floor beside the hearth, long and black, frayed at the ends. She had cut it short even, just below her shoulders. I didn't ask why, but later she told me, I don't want to carry the past on my back. The words struck something in me. I'd carried the past so heavy for so long, I couldn't remember what it felt like to stand without it. Maybe that's why I didn't stop her. Maybe that's why I only nodded and left her to it. After that, the cabin felt different, not in big ways, but in small ones. She helped peel potatoes for stew, her hands steady with years of practice. She laid blankets out neat, tucked corners sharp, the way women who have tended homes their whole lives do. She carried kindling one arm at a time, even when her foot dragged with pain, and she never once complained. I noticed the way her hands worked. Strong, practiced, scarred. Not the hands of someone who'd lived soft. She'd skinned hides, built fires, hauled water. She wasn't a woman who'd been pampered in ceremony, even if she'd once been dressed like one. That grit, that steady patience, it stirred something in me I hadn't let myself feel in years. Respect. Still, I wanted her to know she wasn't temporary here, not just another ghost passing through my silence. So one afternoon, I brought down old lumber from the loft of the barn. She came to the porch, wrapped in my wife's patched coat, and watched as I laid the boards in the snow. You meant it, she said after a while, about building something. I don't say things I don't mean, I told her. Her eyes searched mine, quiet, weighing me. Then she stepped down from the porch and into the snow. Then let me help. I handed her a hammer. She gripped it with both hands, tested the weight, and nodded. Together, we started framing an extra room off the cabin side. Nothing fancy, just boards and nails, a place she could call her own. The work went slow, but she never asked to stop. I saw her grit her teeth when her foot ached, but she held the boards steady anyway. That night, after we'd eaten, I handed her a cup of cider and said, "You don't have to prove anything." Her eyes caught mine in the firelight. "I'm not proving, I'm choosing." Those words sank deep. For years, I thought life was about endurance, just lasting through each day. But here she was, half broken by her people, cut off from everything she'd known. And she still found the will to choose. I couldn't remember the last time I'd chosen anything but survival. Not long after, I gave her something I hadn't touched in nearly a decade, my wife's old coat. I pulled it from where I'd kept it wrapped in cloth, laid it by Tala without speaking. She looked at me, her hand running over the wool like it was glass. "Whose was it?" she asked. "My wife's," I said. My voice caught, but I didn't look away. She'd want someone using it, otherwise it just sits. Tala didn't refuse. She tried it on, too big at the shoulders, but warm, and she nodded once. "Thank you." That was all. No ceremony, no weight of words, just gratitude. The next morning, she wore it when we walked out to check the traps near the tree line. It was the first time she'd stepped beyond the yard since arriving. The snow was still deep, the air cutting, but she moved steady beside me, the coat wrapped tight. Watching her there, present, alive, I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not even hope. Something quieter, steadier, like a man who'd been holding his breath too long and finally let it out. In the evening, she started asking small questions about the cows, the garden, the ridge trails. Nothing deep, nothing prying, just the sort of things that make a house less strange. I answered, and for the first time in years, my own voice didn't feel heavy. It felt useful. One night, as the fire burned low, she asked if my wife had ever seen this place. "No," I said. "I was building it when she died." Tala lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." I gave a small nod. "You're not the only one who's lost something." She looked at me then, her eyes not pitying but steady. And I realized I hadn't spoken of my wife like that to anyone since the day I buried her. Tala hadn't asked to carry that piece of me, but she had, quiet, without judgment. The trust between us wasn't spoken. It was in the way she folded the blankets, the way I left tools within her reach without worry, the way we shared the table without silence pressing sharp between us. It wasn't warm yet, not fully, but it wasn't cold either. And for a man who thought winter would claim him long before spring ever came, that shift meant everything. The air between us had been changing for days, though I tried not to name it. Naming things gives them weight, makes them harder to set down. And I'd spent years teaching myself not to pick up what I couldn't carry. But even I could feel it. It was in the way Tala stood a little closer when we spoke, in the way her eyes didn't drift away anymore when mine settled on her. It was in the quiet touches, the brush of hands at the wash basin, the pass of a bowl at supper that neither of us pulled back from. One evening, the snow outside had softened into a quiet drift. The storm still pressed at the walls, but not with the same rage. Inside, the fire burned steady, filling the cabin with a glow that reached places the light hadn't touched in years. Tala sat on her cot, combing out her hair with slow, careful strokes. I sat at the table, oiling the hinges on my trap box, pretending to be more focused on the work than I really was. My eyes kept straying toward her. She broke the silence first. Do you miss her? I didn't ask who. I set the cloth down and let the question hang in the air. My throat tightened, the old ache rising, but I forced myself to answer. I did, for a long time. She kept brushing, but her eyes lifted toward me, waiting. She was kind, I said slowly. But she carried a weight after the boy came. He didn't last the winter, and my voice trailed. But I didn't need to finish. Tala's eyes softened. She understood. That's why you built this place, she said. Not as a question, but as truth she could already see. I nodded. I needed distance. I didn't want reminders. She turned her gaze back to her hair, her voice quiet. You let me in, not just through the door. Those words struck deep. I didn't answer right away. My hands stilled on the hinge, my chest heavy, with the weight of what I knew was true. I'd let her in further than I'd intended. And instead of regret, I felt something else, relief. I pushed back from the table, crossed the room, and crouched in front of her. She didn't stop combing, but her eyes met mine. I studied her face, the scar of cold, still visible in her skin, the strength settled in her jaw. I reached forward gently and took the comb from her hand. I set it aside and touched her jaw with my fingers. She didn't flinch. She leaned in, just enough. I kissed her then, not out of hunger or heat, but out of a quiet need I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. Her hand rose to my chest, resting there lightly, steady as her breath. When we pulled back, she held my gaze and whispered, I'm not leaving. The words lodged in my chest, warm and sharp at once. For 8 years, I'd lived expecting everyone to eventually walk away. For 8 years, I'd built walls so high, no one could stay even if they wanted to. And here she was, saying what I hadn't dared hope. Good, I said softly. My voice came out rough, but I meant every syllable. The kiss didn't change the weather. Snow still clung to the pines. The wind still crept through cracks in the walls. But something inside me shifted, steady and real. The silence in the cabin wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive. That night she lay beside me for the first time. She didn't hesitate. She slipped under the quilt, her bare feet brushing mine, her body fitting close against me, like she'd been meant to be there all along. I wrapped my arms around her, but not to claim her, only to hold. For a long time, we didn't move, just breathed together. When our bodies did move, it was slow, quiet, steady. No urgency, no ceremony, no hunger to prove anything. It felt more like a meeting of survival and choice, like two lives finally allowed to rest in the same rhythm. The fire popped softly in the hearth, casting light over the wooden walls. And for the first time since my wife's passing, the cabin didn't feel haunted by what I'd lost. It felt alive with what I'd found. Later, as the flames burned low, Tala whispered, "If I carry a child this time, it will not belong to anyone but me." I kissed the crown of her head and said, "It'll belong to both of us, but no one else." She didn't answer, but the way she settled against me, her body softening, told me she believed it. I lay awake a while after she slept, my arm tight around her waist, listening to her breathing even out. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentle this time, almost like blessing instead of burden. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel cold. It was a morning like any other, or at least it started that way. The snow had begun to melt just enough that the roof dripped steady at midday, though the air still bit hard when you stepped outside. I'd gone to the barn, cleared the stalls, and shoveled feed for the cows. When I came back, I found Tala sitting at the table, her hands folded tight in her lap. She wasn't sick, I could tell that right off. But there was something in her eyes, quiet, searching, that made my stomach knot before she even spoke. I hung my coat, brushed the snow from my shoulders, and asked, "What is it?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to her hands. Then slowly she lifted them to meet mine. "It's been weeks. I haven't bled." The room went still. My breath caught, not sharp, not panicked, just heavy. I stepped closer, pulled out a chair, and sat beside her. "You're sure?" She nodded once. "Yes." Neither of us said anything for a long moment. I studied her face, the way her jaw tense, the way her fingers twisted in the blanket she'd draped across her knees. She wasn't smiling, wasn't looking for celebration. What she wanted was truth, something solid to stand on. "You feel all right?" I asked. "Better than I thought I would, no sickness. But I can feel something different, deep." I laid my hand gently over hers. Then we planned for that together. Her grip tightened around mine. "If it's true, if it grows, I want this child to live like we do. Not in fear, not under someone's name. Just here, with you, with me." I nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." We didn't speak more of it that day, but everything I did afterward carried a new weight. I went to the room we'd been building and reinforced the windows with the best boards I had, made sure the frame was tight enough to hold through another storm. I didn't say aloud that it was for the baby, but Tala knew. I could see it in the way she touched the door frame when she passed by, her hand lingering as though she was measuring what it meant to have a place built not for ceremony, not for show, but for life. In the evenings, she sewed scraps of fabric together by firelight. Small pieces, nothing finished, but steady, patient stitches. She didn't tell me what she was making, but I knew. I didn't press her. Some work is too sacred to name before it's ready. One morning, while she was buttoning her coat, I asked something I'd been turning over in my head. "You said before no one knew about the first child you lost." She paused, her hand still at the collar. "That's right. Do you want people to know now?" She was quiet a long time before answering. Then she turned to me. "Not people, just one. My mother." "Your mother," I repeated, and she nodded. "She didn't fight for me when they turned me out," Tala said, voice even but heavy. "But she cried. I saw it. She knew it was wrong. She had no power to stop it. But I want her to know I lived, that I didn't die in the snow." I touched her cheek, my thumb brushing warm across skin that had known too much cold. "When the thaw comes, we'll leave word at the trading post. Quiet. Someone will bring it to her." Relief filled her eyes, not tears, just a loosening I hadn't seen before. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that week, a coyote wandered too close to the coop. I shot it clean through the shoulder from the porch. Tala stood beside me, watching the animal go still in the snow. "Most men would have killed it outright," she said. "It wasn't hunting," I told her. "It was starving." She looked at me for a long moment. "You've seen too much death to chase more of it." I met her gaze, steady. "Haven't you?" She nodded. "That's why I'm here." That night, lying together under the quilt, her back warm against my chest, she whispered, "This child will be born into stillness, not ceremony, not fire." I pulled her closer, my hand resting low at her waist. "Born into choice," I said. She closed her eyes and let out a breath, not sharp this time, but soft, as though she'd finally allowed herself to rest. I stared at the fire as it burned low, my hands still against her. I thought of my boy, gone before he ever had a chance. I thought of the hollow years after, the silence I had convinced myself was all I deserved. And now here she was, carrying the chance at life I never thought would be mine again. I didn't know if the child would come. I didn't know if fate would strip it from us before it took a first breath. But I knew this much: I would not let Tala face it alone. Spring doesn't come sudden in these ridges. It doesn't burst in with color or warmth. It creeps, quiet and slow, showing itself in signs only a man who's watched too many winters would notice. The icicles hanging from the roof drip longer at midday. The hens begin to cluck louder, restless with the sun. Sap glistens on the pines, like it's been waiting beneath the bark for months just to breathe again. That's how I knew the worst had passed. By then, the cabin had shifted into something which I hadn't imagined back when the snow first fell. It was no longer a shelter built to keep only me alive. It was a home, lived in, with her presence in every corner. Tala's basket of mending sat under the table, threads and scraps of cloth tucked neat, like she'd been born for that kind of work. My shirts hung beside her flannel wrap on the line. The new room we built was finished now, and the shelf I'd promised her held the small carving of a pine tree my mother once gave me. What had once been only wood and nails had become something steady, something that spoke without words. This was hers too. Her belly had begun to round, not much yet, but enough that she moved different. She paused more often when standing, rested her hand against the small of her back, and sometimes stood by the window, with one hand braced on the frame and the other over her stomach. She didn't talk much about it, not directly. But I didn't need her words. I saw it in the way she slowed her steps, in the way her eyes softened when she touched her own body, like it wasn't failing her anymore, but holding something new. One morning, I brought her a basin of warm water without being asked. She sat by the stove, soaking her feet, her face calm but thoughtful. "You never asked for this," she said quietly, looking down at the steam rising from the basin. "I didn't have to," I replied. "You came." She looked up, her eyes holding mine steady. "Are you ready?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm not afraid. That's enough." She reached for my hand then, guided it to her belly. At first it was just stillness, then a slow turning pressure beneath her skin. I held my breath, waiting. And then it came, a small flicker of movement, alive and certain. My throat tightened. I didn't speak, but I nodded, and she knew what that meant. Later that day, we walked to the ridge together. The trails had softened, mud showing through in places, water running in small rivulets down into the basin. From the ridge we could see far, the valley below waking from its long sleep. Tala bent to pick a sprig of wild mint by the creek, rubbed it between her fingers and smiled faintly. It was the first time I'd seen her smile without effort, open and unguarded. On the way back, she stopped at the old stump where we'd left her letter. It was gone, and in its place was a strip of cloth, deep red, the color of her old lodge's ceremonial thread. She held it with both hands, her face still as she whispered, "She got it." "Your mother?" I asked. She nodded. "It means I'm no longer ghosted. I am remembered." I watched her a long moment, then nodded. "That's enough." We walked home in silence, but it wasn't heavy. The air felt full, like something old had been settled, like she was no longer carrying it alone. That evening, she cooked stew with the last of the carrots from winter storage. Halfway through, she braced herself against the table when the child shifted sharp under her ribs. I stood behind her, my hand steady on her waist. I've got you, I said. You always do, she murmured, leaning back against me. Later, when the dishes were washed and the fire burned low, she took my hand and led me to the bed. She lay close, the quilt pulled over us both, her voice soft in the dark. You never asked me to marry you. I figured I didn't need to, I said. We already chose each other. She smiled faintly, her hand warm in mine. Still ask me. I looked into her eyes, steady, no hesitation. Will you be my wife? She nodded once, her voice no louder than a breath. I already am. The child stirred again under her skin, and I laid my hand over hers. Our child, I said. She covered my hand with hers, whispering, Our family. When I closed my eyes that night, I listened not to the storm, not to the silence, but to the rhythm of her breathing and the faint shift of life beneath her hand. The cabin, once a place of exile, was now a place of beginning. The land, once only survival, now promised something more. Spring had come, not sudden, not loud, but enough. By the time the last of the snow melted from the lower trails, the cabin no longer felt like it had when the winter first set in. It wasn't just mine anymore. The air carried her rhythm as much as mine, and the silence that once echoed with grief now felt like something whole, something shared. Tala moved slower these days, her belly rounded and visible under the wraps she wore, but every motion she made seemed to carry a quiet certainty. I found myself watching her in the small moments, her hand resting on her stomach as she stirred a pot, the way she paused at the window to feel the air shift, the hum under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening. She had become the sound of life in this place. One evening, after the chores were done and the fire burned steady, I pulled a small pouch down from the shelf. I'd carried it with me for years, wrapped in oilskin, tucked away in the back of a drawer I rarely opened. Inside were the only things my mother left me: a plain silver ring, wide-banded and simple, and a small wooden carving of a pine tree she had given me before the war. She told me once, if you make it through, use it when you find someone who stays. I never thought I'd open that pouch again. Never thought I'd have cause. Tala was mending by the fire, needle moving slow but steady through a piece of cloth. Her hair was tied back, her face calm, but I could see the tiredness in her shoulders. I sat beside her, the pouch in my hands. This belonged to my mother, I said, opening it slowly. She looked over, curious. I placed the ring in her palm. Her fingers closed around it gently, like she knew it carried more than silver. She gave me this before I left for the war, I told her. Said if I lived long enough to come back, I should keep it for the one who stayed. Her eyes lifted to mine. And you've kept it all this time? I did, I said, though I didn't think I'd ever give it. She studied the ring, tracing the smooth band with her thumb. Then she looked back at me, her voice low but certain. I've already chosen you. I nodded. I know. But I want you to know I've chosen you too. And this isn't about what we've lost. It's about what we're building. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she slid the ring onto her finger. It was loose, but it held. She closed her hand around it, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, Then it's ours. I leaned in, kissed her gently, not as a question, not as a beginning, but as a promise. When we pulled apart, she placed my hand on her belly. The child moved beneath my palm, small, but steady, alive. My throat tightened, and I couldn't speak. All I could do was hold my hand there, as if touching something sacred. The days that followed didn't change much on the surface. We still worked as we always had. I chopped wood, hauled water, checked traps. She mended, cooked, tended to small tasks, her movements slower now, but still full of purpose. Yet beneath it all, something had shifted. That ring on her hand wasn't just a piece of silver, it was a quiet vow, not made with witnesses or ceremony, but with choice. One afternoon, as we walked the ridge together, she stopped, breathing slow, her hand pressed to her side. I steadied her, ready to turn back, but she shook her head. Number, I want to see the valley. We stood there looking out across the land as the thaw spread, green pushing up through the damp soil. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. This is where I want our child to grow, she said. I wrapped an arm around her, my hand warm against her back. Then this is where we'll stay. She smiled faintly, her eyes on the valley, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in years. This land wasn't just a place I'd built to hide from grief. It was becoming a place where life could take root again. That night, lying beside her, I thought about all the things I'd lost. My wife, my boy, the man I used to be before the war stripped pieces off me I'll never get back. But when I looked at Tala, resting with her hand over her stomach, the ring glinting faintly in the firelight, I understood something I hadn't before. Loss hadn't taken everything. It had left me here, alive, able to choose again. And I had. She turned toward me in the quiet, her eyes searching mine. You didn't ask me to be your wife, she said softly. I smiled faintly. I figured I didn't need to. We already chose each other. Still ask me, she whispered. I took her hand, the ring loose on her finger, but shining all the same. Will you be my wife? She nodded, her eyes steady. I already am. I pulled her close, kissed her again, and for the first time since I buried my family, the word home didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a promise. Spring had settled for good by the time I understood what we'd built. Not just a cabin, not just a room added on, with boards hammered straight. What stood here now was something I never thought I'd have again. A home. The land was alive in ways it hadn't been all winter. The hens strutted loud in the yard, fat and stubborn, as if they owned the place. The cows grazed in the west pasture, where green shoots had begun to rise from damp soil. The creek ran high with meltwater, its sound reaching the ridge like a song. I'd lived through winter so long and bitter that I stopped believing spring would ever come. But it always did. This time, it carried more than thaw and green. It carried her. And it carried the life growing inside her, inside the cabin. Everything bore her mark now. Her wrap hung beside my shirts by the door. Her basket of mending sat tucked under the table. The shelf in the new room held her thread, her beads, and the carving of the pine tree my mother once gave me. What was once a place I filled with silence and grief was now a place filled with her steady hands and her quiet strength. Even the air smelled different, stew simmering, wood smoke mingled with dried mint she'd hung near the window. It no longer smelled like a man keeping to himself. It smelled lived in. Tala moved slower with the child inside her, but not fragile. She was never fragile. She worked steady, pausing when she needed, resting a hand against her back or her stomach when the weight grew too much. I watched her sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her eyes softened when she felt the baby shift, the way she stood taller than before, as if carrying life gave her back what had been taken from her. She never spoke of the shame that once marked her, the casting out, the years of being blamed for what was never hers to bear. But I could see it fall from her shoulders with every passing day here. This child wasn't born out of duty or demand, it was born of choice, and that made all the difference. One evening, as the sun set gold across the ridges, she came to stand beside me by the door. The air smelled of pine and earth, the first true scent of spring. She pressed her hand into mine and said, "I thought I would die in the snow." I looked at her, the light catching her face, and shook my head. "Not here, not with me." She held my gaze. "You saved me." I thought about that for a moment, then answered, "Maybe you saved me too." Because the truth was, before she came, I was only living enough to keep breathing. My days were split wood and silent meals. My nights were long stretches of staring at walls that reminded me only of what I'd lost. I told myself that was safety, that solitude would keep me from being broken again. But solitude doesn't keep a man whole, it just freezes him from the inside out. Tala brought warmth into this place, not with words or laughter, but with presence. With her, I remembered what it meant to share silence instead of being trapped in it. With her, I remembered what it meant to look forward instead of back. The night she told me she wasn't leaving, something in me broke open. And when she put on my mother's ring and said she already was my wife, I understood that love didn't need ceremony or witnesses. It didn't need the town's approval or her tribe's blessing. It only needed choice, hers and mine. And we had made it. The lesson I've carried from it all is simple. A man can build walls high enough to keep the world out, but one day, the world might send someone who slips through anyway. And when it does, you can choose to bolt the door and stay frozen, or you can let them in and see what grows. Tala could have died out there. I could have stayed alone until the ground claimed me too. But instead, we chose each other, not because we had to, not because anyone demanded it, but because we wanted to. And that has made all the difference. So now when I wake in the morning, I don't hear only the crackle of fire and the groan of timber in the wind. I hear her footsteps, slow but steady. I hear the soft hum of her voice as she starts the day. I hear life moving through these walls again. And for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel like I'm living. This home isn't bound by law or tribe or ceremony. It's bound by choice. Every day she stays, every day I stay, we build it again. And when the child comes, it will be born into that, not into fear, not into silence, but into a place made whole by love that asks for nothing but presence. That is enough, more than enough. And if you've stayed with me through this story, I'll ask you for one thing. Like this video so others can find it, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Share what this story brings to you. And if you want to walk with me through more stories of loss turned into life, of silence turned into home, follow this channel. There's more to tell. Because this is how I learned it. The cold doesn't last forever. Sometimes spring comes when you least expect it. And sometimes it comes in the form of a barefoot woman in the snow who refuses to die and in choosing to stay teaches you how to live again.